Can you guys hear me in the back, or do I have to yell? Yeah? Good? All right, sweet. So first off, thank you, Mark, for inviting me. This is, like he said, my first trip to the UK. Only ever been to Europe twice, so I'm still messing things up while I'm here. So I usually start this talk with a little bit of a story. Let's see here, now it's been about 8 years ago. I was married with 2 kids, living in the middle of nowhere, Ohio. If anybody knows where that is, I'm sorry. Nobody's probably ever visited it, first off. Super shitty house in like this glorified trailer park. And my second son was about 1. First son was 8. And without going into a whole lot of details of my marriage, really didn't have any control over my life at the time. That being said, I remember the one night I realized something was really wrong with me. Like, I knew the other things that were wrong with me already, but something like truly really wrong with me. I had just gotten out of the shower and just getting ready for bed, broke down crying. Like, couldn't talk, couldn't think. This is the closest representation I can think of what was actually going on in my head. My husband had no idea what was wrong. He thought, like, the world was ending. He had no idea what was going on. And I tried to force myself to speak, and it physically hurt to try and talk, right? And I thought the world was ending. Like, I just had this impending doom, and I thought everything was ending, right? It took about an hour and a half before I finally calmed myself down enough to tell him what was wrong. And it was my shower curtain was dirty. Stupidest thing ever to cry for like an hour and a half about, right? But that's what finally like tipped me over the edge. I felt super stupid and immature, right? And looking back at a lot of it now, a lot of the anxiety problems I had were due to uncleanliness in the house and whatever that I couldn't control. And that in itself is a whole other book of stories. And the funny thing is, I even when I knew something was wrong internally, I didn't ask for any help. I thought, at the ripe old age of 25, I had made it this far. Why can't I handle everything else on my own, right? So why in the world am I bringing this up here, right? Usually we have technical talks, we have people hacking things, we have people protecting things, policy, not usually much policy, but we talk about technical things, right? Well, like the hacker community and Infosec has been the first group of people that I've found that really, truly get me. A lot of you have gone through the same struggles that I have growing up. Like, you're kind of an outcast, you get made fun of for being nerdy, that kind of stuff. And when I first started posting and talking about mental health, like my own personal mental health issues, like on Facebook and Twitter and everything, I got a whole lot of feedback. They're like, but you seem so upbeat. Like, you're always laughing, you're always cracking jokes. Like, how are you even depressed, right? And then I just realized there was a lot of people with the same kind of issues that I was having. So I figured, why not talk about it, right? So that's what we'll cover a little bit about today, is just how this is all happening in InfoSec and tech as well, right? Because a lot of us have the same issues. And looking back now at my life after I finally got some help, I had been struggling with this since my teens, and I just didn't realize it. So we never want to admit anything's wrong with us, right? What's the first step of any 12-step program? Yeah, asking for help and admitting to yourself that you have an issue, right? But if you kind of stop there and don't go any further, you're not going to get any better, right? You'll just become more angry and more depressed. And not only do people in our industry have the normal stresses of your average 9-to-5 job, but we have family and pressures from our bosses, and a lot of us are in specific industries that deal with things like incident response, or catching pedophiles, or human trafficking cases. Like, there's a lot of really difficult stuff to deal with, even if you're in the technical industry, right? And when you combine all of the normal pressures along with us sitting behind a keyboard for 20 12 to 16 hours a day, depending on what you do, it really starts to build up. So I never thought I would do so much research on mental health. This is me, right? Yeah, this is a lot of us. And when I started reading about this topic, the first thing I Googled was mental health issues in STEM fields. And holy crap, most of them were about women. But after removing woman as a search term, it took it from 6 million articles down to 2. But really, when it comes to mental illnesses, like the sexes are different, right? Women are more likely to be diagnosed with things like anxiety and depression, where men kind of tend towards substance abuse and antisocial disorders. But the reason why most of those articles were women is because we're the minority, right? The minority. You want to focus on minorities a lot of the times, so that's what all the articles were about. Not saying that you guys don't have problems. I know some of you have a lot of problems, right? You just aren't talking about it. But the hypothesis I was trying to prove is that it seems like people in STEM might have a higher rate of mental health issues. I mean, I've known way too many people personally that have committed suicide or gone through self-harm or been, committed themselves to a mental institution because of depression or suicidal thoughts. And I actually, through this research, found it's called the Savannah IQ interaction hypothesis. And I think I have a quote from this, yeah. So it states and kind of backs this up that the finding of an association between progressively increasing risk of bipolar disorder and high arithmetic intellectual performance is rather surprising. He talked about having really high mathematical scores also correlated with people having a tendency of experiencing mania. So it was definitely in their studies showed that the people with the higher IQs tended to have higher mental health problems. It also talks about people with those higher IQs tending to self-medicate way more than the average person. So how many of you, I'm not going to give away any spoilers, but how many of you like Mr. Robot or watched Mr. Robot? Okay. So it shows kind of how much either they did a lot of research into this or they just got really lucky. Because the main character, Elliot, suffers from social anxiety disorder, depression, delusions, and paranoia. And he self-medicates, right? He self-medicates with morphine, and he uses Suboxone to kind of bring himself back down and not suffer withdrawal symptoms. But that's basically, he's a great case study for that paper, right? Because he's super, super highly intelligent and self-medicating himself. I don't recommend that. Let's preface no morphine for you unless it's prescribed. So I'm going to move on to some more statistics. Some of these are U.S.-centric, but we're just going to assume that it applies to a lot of us. So there was a study done at Berkeley that showed that 42 to 48% of PhD students suffered from clinical depression. It's almost half of them suffer from clinical depression, where it's 10% of the major population does. So definitely, sorry if you're in uni, but you're probably going to be suffering from it more than the average Joe. Which makes sense in those Google results. There were significantly more results involving those women because, like I said, the focus on minorities and the lack of reporting from men. So I know this just says in the U.S., so ignore that part. I'm just trying to prove a point, right?
It's pretty much the same.
Yeah, same in the UK. And all of this, and we still think that everybody has it together better than what we do, right? I know I'm guilty of it. A lot of people have given talks about imposter syndrome, right? So you thinking that you don't belong because why are you getting paid this amount to do what you don't think you know how to do? And just that never goes away. I don't care who you are, how much you've done, how much you've learned. That never goes away. You just feel like you're drowning while everybody else around you is doing fine. And I can tell you that's definitely not the truth. So I know I can think of a good amount of people that have talked me through different situations like this, as well as all the other kind of times that I've been limited because my brain has decided to go in like some crazy direction. So I found out the U.S. Preventive Service Task Force recommends that all Americans be screened for depression, which, all right, we're a first world country, right? Like we got, I don't want to say we have our shit together because obviously that's not right. But is it, yeah, right. Is it, like, I was just thinking, like, all of them, like all of us, like we're all supposed to be screened for depression. Is it because of our diet? Is it because of our, it's probably because of our government, probably the same reason why you guys need to be screened for depression. Your government.
The pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, in the grand scheme of things, we don't really have that much, going bad for us when you look at, how well we're doing compared to the rest of the world. But that really doesn't matter when you're like shriveled in the corner and can't talk, right? So I'm going to dive real quick into different types of mental health issues and their characters. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this because, like, I'm not a doctor, and I can't memorize all of the different symptoms for everything. But we'll cover some of the quick ones, and I'll tell you some of my terrible stories about mine. So a few of my slides, I use these pictures with the hashtag Inktober. There's a really good artist in Ohio that created these for like mental health awareness, and he was actually one of the original artists for Cyanide and Happiness, if anybody knows that cartoon. Yeah. So first, there's social anxiety disorder, which is me. Fear of situations where you might be judged, worried that you might offend somebody, say the wrong thing, look at them the wrong way. Fear of interacting with strangers, physical symptoms that might cause you embarrassment, like flushed cheeks, sweating, that kind of stuff. Avoiding situations where you might be the center of attention, which don't ask me how I can get up here every time. I just fake it, really. Have anxiety in anticipation of a upcoming event. And one that I do a lot is spending times after a social situation repeatedly going over every move that I made, every word that I said, and how it may have come across to the other person.
Oh my God, you're
Yeah, right? And you just expect the worst possible outcome for everything that you do all the time. So you might say to yourself, as I go through these, that these are things that happen to you every now and then, but all of the diagnoses talk about how this is recurring and intense fears that happen, or intense issues that you deal with all of these, right? You might avoid normal social situations like going to the bathroom, eating in public. I had a friend that I used to work with that refused to eat out with us at all. She would have to eat at her desk because she didn't want anybody to watch her chew or swallow. Making eye contact. I know I have a problem calling people on the phone, which I hate that, but dating is super fun when you're in the middle of nowhere in your mid-30s. It's like it's with anxiety. It's just a special kind of hell, I can tell you. Attending parties or social gatherings, that kind of stuff. Anything to do with people. And I don't know how many relationships I've ruined because my panic or anxiety attacks. And I don't just mean like romantic relationships, right? I mean friendships or business relationships, anything like that, just because, you can't always get across what's going on inside your head, and you really just make up situations that are happening that haven't actually happened. I'll like overinvest myself in these relationships and just punish myself in my head over and over again, just because, you make up those situations that are happening and they're not actually. So next up is depression. Definitely one of the most talked about mental health issues out there. A lot of people will associate this with just being sad. It's definitely not the case, right? It is way more than that. And according to a recent World Health Organization study, It's actually the leading cause of physical illness in the world, because a lot of physical problems manifest itself when you have depression. You know, feeling of sadness, angry outbursts. A lot of the times you get a huge loss of interest in anything that used to make you happy. You know, whether it's your hobbies or your work or your family, anything like that just doesn't really hold you anymore, right? Sleep disturbances, either way. You either sleep too much or don't sleep at all. Tiredness, lack of energy. So I try and add at least some funny memes to this because I realize how super depressing the entire talk is. But hopefully I add something to it to make you laugh. Feeling of worthlessness or guilt, blaming yourself for everything, trouble thinking and concentrating, and again, unplanned physical problems. Next up, super fun one. This is bipolar disorder. It's previously known as manic depression. And there's two sides to that. First is the manic part, where you're super upbeat and jumpy and wired, and you want to take on the world. With that, though, you also make really rash decisions when it comes to money or relationships or, you know, a lot of different things. And then the second part of that is all the normal characteristics of depression. So manic depression part, right? Both sides. I don't have anything else to say for this one. It's just funny. And then post-traumatic stress disorder. A lot of times is associated with people that have been in active combat, right? But it's not just that. It can be anytime you've witnessed like a tragic event. So being attacked, being raped, you know, if you've seen a murder, death of a parent, like anything like that, and it will, any kind of trauma will bring back really terrible, horrible memories and flashbacks of, you know, whatever that trauma was. You'll get upsetting dreams, severe emotional and physical distress and reactions. Borderline personality disorder is also called dissociative identity disorder. It's a mental health disorder that impacts the way you think and feel about yourself and others. And it also, you know, you end up having, it's like multiple personality disorder as well. They're similar. You'll have rapid changes in self-identity. I thought I had a good... who's ever read, well, the movie doesn't really count, but who's ever read Dark Tower series by Stephen King? Yeah, all right, some of you. So I never make references, so I don't know why there's so many in this talk, because I never get references myself. But in the book, they do a really good job of explaining what it's actually like to have schizophrenia or multiple personality disorder, because one of the main characters just doesn't realize that the other person exists, right? Because they're completely separate. A lot of times it'll come as a coping mechanism of some kind of trauma. One of the worst cases of schizophrenia ever recorded was a 7-year-old little girl named Janie. So in 2009, she was diagnosed, and she had these hallucinations of these imaginary friends. Her doctor recorded over 200 different cats, dogs, rats. All of them would tell her to do harmful things to people, right, and herself. At one point in time, she, once she got to a certain point, her parents, even though they were divorced, had to stay in the same house together because they also had a son, and they had to do shifts. So, 12-hour shifts, sleeping on and off, because she would wake up and she tried to kill her baby brother several times, as well as herself, and it was these manifestations and friends that she had, these cats and rats and stuff, that were telling her to do these bad things or they would hurt her. And she was 7. So that's again, like way end of the spectrum of a very intense case of that, but still you can see some of the things that would be pretty difficult. Oh, and she had already attempted suicide 7 times by the time she was 10. There's obsessive compulsive disorder. A lot of people will associate this with, like, I like putting in things in spreadsheets, or I like having clean towels or something. I don't know. But no, OCD is definitely more than that. It is a need to have that kind of stuff done. Nikola Tesla was one of the more famous cases. So he had to walk around a building 3 times before he entered it. He wouldn't eat with women, like eat or drink with women, and he had an intense fear of circle-shaped objects, which that would be very difficult getting through life. We have a fear of contamination or dirt, unwanted thoughts, including aggression. So we can all agree that having one or even more than one of these conditions would royally suck, right? So how do you cope with these or help others that have them, that you love and care for? How do you help them cope? A while back, so this has been like almost two years ago, I put out a survey to like my Twitter followers, just asking them a barrage of like 25 different questions on how they viewed mental health, which I know is not super scientific or anything, but I just kind of wanted a baseline of good answers, right? And this is the response for the question, do you participate in any activities to reduce, dull, or improve the stress or feelings you're having, such as alcohol, prescription drugs, other drugs, exercise, medication, or other? So going back to the whole me having crazy anxiety, after I put this out, I realized if I would have taken it first, I wouldn't have messed it up so much, because this was a multiple choice. No. You just had to pick one, right? You couldn't pick more. You couldn't do more than one answer. And most of the responses I got in the other category were like, I do all of these, and I can only pick one. So out of those 860 responses I got for this, my favorite other entries for that category were pretend to be a Vulcan, cats, masturbation, and Twitter, which I'm not sure how some of those help you cope with anything, especially Twitter. Especially Twitter.
The worst, I'm doing like really worse than you.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So when I did this, I also reached out to a friend of mine that does mental health counseling, and he told me what the 2 best ways were to increase or improve the chemicals in your brain without drugs or whatever. Does anybody have a guess on what those 2 things are?
Exercise.
Exercise is one of them.
Meditation.
Nope.
Sex.
There you go. But only if you're doing it right. Sorry, that was sex for anybody that didn't hear it in the back. So I use my mom for a sounding board for a lot of the talks that I do, which is great because I love making her shake her head at me as much as humanly possible. And when I started talking to her about like counseling and psychiatry and medication and all that kind of stuff, she actually mentioned her grandma, which would have been my great grandma, right? And how when she started going through menopause, they like committed her and sent her away, right? Because that's not something you talk about back then. And she was suffering like from withdrawal and just sad behavior, right, as she's going through menopause. And for treatment at that time, she was just given regular shock therapy treatments, right, which is fantastic. I mean, there's no better way to cure your depression than just shocking the shit out of you, right? But now we have better options, right? So I want to apologize in advance because I had to apologize once at a conference because someone thought this was terrible. And it's a pun. If you don't get what puns are, I'm sorry. But I think we can agree that, the majority of people don't need safe spaces, right? But one of the main reasons why I started Mental Health Hackers is for a quiet space at conferences to just go and chill out, because I would have major panic attacks at conferences after I work at home all the time, alone, for days on end with only talking to my kids sometimes. And then I'll show up to a conference and for several days straight, just be surrounded by people and go into like crazy panic attacks. So I'm like, well, it'd be nice to have something that's a little slower paced, that people can kind of just go and like have some massages or color or do something that's, super low key as opposed to just getting, pounded with information the entire time. But even if you don't use like any kind of coping mechanism or whatever, it can still feel good to externalize your feelings. Whereas like you can do that now. Back then you couldn't. You would get sent away to get shock treatments. You couldn't talk about mental health. You couldn't talk about divorce, teen pregnancy. And I've had all three, and I get to talk about all of them without getting shocked. And you can talk to your friends. You can talk to us. Definitely check out like counseling or therapy, if you think that would help. We have some great information, and we have people going to be writing blog posts about like destigmatizing counseling and what to look for if you're interested in that kind of stuff as well. So back to getting all doped up. The last 20 years has seen a 400% increase in people taking antidepressants, which is it's crazy, that amount. And while we don't really want to throw pills at something or devalue anybody's suffering, there are not better, but sometimes there are other non-medical solutions that exist, right? But if you need to take some, that's fine too. But there's a lot of things that will increase like your dopamine levels automatically, which we talked about a little bit before. So when I was prescribed my first antidepressant, I was used Zoloft, which I'm not sure if it's the same name brand here or not. Citrulline? Citrulline. Oh. This was the explanation I got from my doctor. That it's just a simple chemical reaction, and they are giving you a medication that's going to level you out. That was it. It made sense at the time, right? Something biological isn't quite firing right in my brain, and this is going to give me the chemicals I need to fix it. But during my research, I found out that this is not true. It's kind of true, but not necessarily. But because from what I found out in medical journals, doctors really have no idea why some of this stuff works, which is great. They're just throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks. Which, all right, I get that science can be hard, right? Studies have pointed out that other things, can cause these faulty mood regulations, like, your family history or other medications that you've been on, that kind of stuff. This is the actual Psychological Association article that I found that them talking about it. Said, we do not dispute the possibility that neurotransmitters and other brain chemicals can play a significant role in the etiology of depression. However, we are also concerned that the chemical imbalance explanation may not reflect the full range of causes of depression, and it may be given greater credence by both consumers and practitioners than supported by sound research, and it may be understood in an overly simplistic manner. But really, what do you not get in an overly simplistic manner from your doctor? We do the same thing to end users, right? We're not going to explain everything that we've gone through. We're going to give it to them in bite-sized chunks that they can understand. What time is it? All right. So I started taking Zoloft about 6 months before the end of my marriage, and it was amazing. I wasn't sad anymore, but turns out that I also had no emotions anymore, which is one of the side effects that some people have on Zoloft. You kind of just feel dead inside, which also is not healthy. I have to skip some of this part because I'm going to run out of time. So, yeah, after I found out that Zoloft wasn't great for me in the long term, because I kind of eventually wanted to have feelings again, I switched to Xanax, and I take, Zoloft, Wellbutrin, and I take Xanax every now and then when needed, or 2 bottles of wine works great too. So what are some other coping mechanisms that we can work on? Even if you're probably medicated... even if you're properly medicated, you can have some struggles and still do some stuff to, make yourself feel better. I listened to a podcast called The Hilarious World of Depression. And on there, somebody had come on and talked about naming their anxiety. They named it Steve, and every time Steve would tell them something, they would say, "Shut up, Steve, you're a moron, and that's not how the world works, and I know this doesn't make any sense. It's you. Like, that terrible person in your brain is the one doing all of the decision-making, right?" And other times crying can even do some help. Something I found super cool is there's an actual tear expert, which that's kind of a cool title, right? He actually found that there are the difference between reactive tears and emotional tears. Emotional tears actually contain more hormones that, like, after you've had a good cry, sometimes you do feel better afterwards. And that's exactly why, because it's boosting the right hormones and getting rid of the stress ones out of your tears, which is kind of neat. So I've also used breathing exercises. Things like this is a nice gift to just have on hand, as well as something called binaural beats, which are nice when you have headphones because it's nice and soothing. It's cool to meditate to sometimes. Whole bunch of it on YouTube, just for free. You can pop in your headphones and calm yourself down with those sometimes.
Note from personal experience, if you inhale and exhale far too quickly, you end up with a head rush.
Yeah, if you inhale and yes, you don't want to. You want to follow the GIF. You don't want to do it on like 2 times speed or anything like that. You'll just pass out. And also found out about this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 coping technique. So it is. You can do it with me if you want. Some of these, anyways. Others might be weird. 5 is you acknowledge 5 things around you can see. 4, you can acknowledge 4 things around you that you can touch. Just ask permission first if you're going to touch the person next to you. Acknowledge 3 things that you can hear. So air conditioning, people outside, chairs shuffling around, anything like that. Another one, acknowledge 2 things around you can smell. Apologize in advance if the person next to you is ripe after a full day of conferencing. And then the last one can go 2 different ways. I've seen it's either one positive thing that you can taste. So like take a drink of your water, coffee, whatever. Don't lick your neighbor. Shouldn't have to say that. Or one positive thing about yourself. So now that we've covered a bunch of my personal baggage, we're going to go into some different coping mechanisms that you can help others that are struggling. Because, I mean, even if you're not struggling, I can guarantee you with those numbers, you know somebody that is, even if they're telling you or not. So some things not to say, right? I've heard some of these before, and since I've started talking with other people in the industry about this, they have as well. They've been blamed for their own issues. They've been told to like man up, or
not
just
taking responsibility for their own mental health.
Yeah. They're it's somehow their fault, right? I was super surprised that was a common reaction, and I get a lot of this. And truly, I have a lot going for me. I feel like I have no right to be depressed, right? Like I have 3 super awesome, healthy kids. I have a house. I have a really good job. I get to come do this stuff and travel and meet amazing people. How could I be depressed? Like, I shouldn't have that right. But you know what? I've caught myself saying the same thing to other people that seem really super happy. Like, wow, you don't seem depressed. You're happy all the time. You're always cracking jokes. Like, how is that even possible? And while, you can say, I love you, you're amazing, that kind of stuff. And it's nice to hear, but sometimes it doesn't always help. And one of my favorites, maybe try thinking happier thoughts. I just collect this kind of stuff, so if you ever see any of it, send me your memes. So, like I said before, a good amount of mental health issues will manifest themselves as physical problems, right? And you can't just tell somebody to make more of an effort to heal their broken arm. You're not going to be able to do the same thing about their mental health. And not only have I gotten like positive and negative stories about interactions with people with mental health issues, but almost everybody that I've talked to have surprised others when they've talked about them. They're bringing up their inner demons. So here's some of the do-says. Definitely important. How can I help? I think is a good one. I say, oh man, that sucks a lot too. But that's just in life in general. Another trick that I've learned is I've given people mental health safe words, which is funny, but it works, right? Like those times when I was having major panic anxiety attacks, I can't tell you what's wrong. I can't tell you why. It may be a while before I stop crying, but if I can utter out one word to that person that knows what I do need, like, we're all going to need different stuff, right? Like, I may need to be left alone, do not touch me, or you may need, like, no, just hold me until I stop crying. Like, there's a whole big range of different stuff. When you do, how many of you do, like DR planning? Like, you're not just going to assume your backups work, right? You're going to test them, and you're going to talk about them prior. You're going to have a plan in place for when shit goes down. Same thing with your mental health. It's not too hard to do. You just have to open that dialogue with people that care. And sometimes there's nothing that you can do to help, right? You just have to listen and, wait to see if they can come up with something that they can give you to help. There's a great article that a friend of mine sent me called "This is How You Love Somebody with Anxiety." And boy, is a lot of that in there true as well. Like, silence kills anybody with anxiety, right? So, like, you open up to somebody, or hell, you just say, hey, how's it going? And you don't get a reply. Like, sure, like, my brain knows those people are probably busy and have lives and are doing other stuff, but that jerk in my brain, Steve, tells me, no, you pissed them off, or you said something really weird, like you made an ass out of yourself. So, yeah. And nothing beats a blanket fort. Also, hopefully soon coming to the Mental Health and Wellness Village is blanket forts. So not only is it difficult to talk about in the beginning, so many other things come up that make you want to, like, force that shit deep inside and never talk about it to anybody. I want to talk to you about a few things that our community is already doing. How much time do I have? Ooh, not much. All right. One is ironin.com and Semicolon Project, and then another one is Mental Health Village that we started. Awesome people involved in that. We'll be officially a, 501c3, which is, the American, designation for nonprofits, as soon as I get, the 40 pages of IRS homework done that I have to do. And then I hope, does audio work, if I play a video? We'll find out. So this is Mubix, my friend Mubix. He has a really good video on this. Oh, shit.
Hi, my name's Rob Fuller, and I'm a hacker. Now, every single one of you watching probably has a different definition of what that might be. But I guarantee not a single one of those definitions includes race, creed, color, religion, sexual preference, or anything in between. The hacker community is filled with human beings, people from all walks of life. In our community, like any social community, there are people among us, friends, acquaintances, con buddies that have problems that many of you might not even know they have. We have lost too many of those friends to suicide, drugs, alcohol, depression, and crime. Many of us dove into the world of computers and the internet because it was a place of acceptance. But there's a dark side to this world. It is too easy to disconnect, to miss those markers when all you see is what someone tweets or IMs. The can't see when you hurt, when you cry. There are many ways to help us that need it and are afraid to ask because one of the biggest biases we still have in our community is showing weakness. But you can let those around you know you care, that you are there for them, and the door is open to talk anytime. But one of the best ways is just to be around each other. Hang out, go to a movie, have a good time, talk about your day. To be a true friend, not just another face in a lobby of a conference. If you wish to join me in this fight, please make a video. Or just tell your friends, your con buddies, or your acquaintances that you just see at that lobby con that we are all hacking together.
So that's one of my favorite videos. If somebody like that, like Rob is super badass. If he can talk about that on video and just like tweet it out to everybody, I believe you can too. I believe in you. So let's do some hacking together. My door, nobody's going to visit me in Ohio, but my door's open. My DMs aren't open either. You can tweet at me or catch me in Slack or just email me, contact me somehow. I'm on everything. A lot of times I'll like tweet out if I'm feeling disconnected, I'll just tweet out like a Google Hangouts video. And just, bullshit with people. My kids will come on and say hi, just to talk to like another adult because I don't get that often enough. And this is the slide. This is the slide I usually cry, so I'm going to try really hard not to. The saddest part of the survey results that I put out was answer the question, have you ever felt like you weren't worth much as a person? And 50% of people answered yes, which like just breaks my heart. A lot of these, again, are American-based, but guaranteed you have a lot of UK resources or whatever country you're from. There's definite resources out there. Some of these too, you can even chat online. If you're like me and don't like talking to people on the phone, you can just they just have apps now that you can do that kind of stuff on. And I'd like to finish up with a picture of Puppy because I know, like, the first time I gave this talk, my son was in the audience, which was hard to do when, your kids are in the audience listening to this stuff. And he came up to me, he's like, damn, Mom, that was a downer. Like, what are you doing? So then I added the puppy. So that's me. Thank you so much for making this an awesome B-Sides and my first trip to the UK. You can contact me on Twitter if you want, and be good to each other.